Okay, let's get started because the food smells pretty good, and parts of my body are starting to complain about the lack of it. So, thought maybe we get her going here. Thanks for coming, everybody who's here. I know we've got some people here for their first time, and some people who weren't here last time. It's been a different crowd almost every time. So somebody asked me to take a little bit of a run at it, kind of sum up what other talks were about. Very first week we talked about whether there is life after death. And I heard a little bit of the conversations around the table. I know we had a little bit of reincarnation here, and my point of view is I think there's a lot of tangible proof for life after death. Out-of-body experiences being one thing, but the words of Jesus being another, especially the most famous of which has got to be John 14, where he says, "In my Father's house are many rooms." Maybe you heard, "In my Father's house are many mansions." And if that were not true, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will also come back to take you so that you also may be where I am. And then the end of that, I'm the way, the truth, of the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So that particular verse is only meaningful, really, if Jesus knows what he's talking about. If he's just some dude shooting off his mouth, then who cares what he said? So last week we talked about who's Jesus. And what I talked about anyway was, how much textual evidence of the Bible we have, all these little scraps and sometimes big chunks that date back to the early centuries where things were handwritten out. And some go back to the first century. We got references amongst hostile sources like the Romans of Christians. So there definitely were Christians. And if there's Christians, I'm gathering there's a Christ to be a Christian about. So that was one of the main things that we talked about last time. And I kind of ended it with Jesus' purpose being stated that he was here on a mission, really. And that's what I want to talk about a little tonight. In one passage of the Bible, Jesus sums up his mission this way. He says, "I have come so that you may have life." So that his purpose wasn't so much just to be a prophet or a teacher or to do miracles and, fix sick people. It was something to do with us having eternal life. And to really get into why Jesus died on the cross, or even if Jesus died on the cross, depending on some people's point of view, I have to really explain what is kind of an odd plan that God had, and some of the bad news that the Bible does share. This has got to be the part of the Bible that nobody wants to believe, but if it's true, you should know it. The Bible explains that human beings are not the way God created them to be. So technically, when we are born, we cannot say, "You made me this way." Some people got the model that God's like a little factory, cracks out little babies and puts them out like that. But that's not what it means that God created us. The Bible explained that God created human beings to be a reflection of him, absolutely without sin, not meant to die, not meant to age, and apparently that's genetically possible. The story of Adam and Eve, you can argue about whether that's historical or not, but it makes the point that one individual kind of made a decision that impacted all of us. And you can imagine this, one individual saying, "I don't trust you, God. I'd rather be God myself." And in doing that, in the act of doing that, which required a physical action, that he and his wife became changed. Now, the Bible doesn't talk about genetics or anything like that, but you can kind of figure it out. That's exactly what happened. That they became altered, and because we are all descendants of a person, and science would back that up, looking at the mitochondrial DNA, that we're all descendants of one woman, anyway. That problem, that genetic problem, gets passed down to each of us, so that we are not the way we were intended to be. And what ways is that? Well, a lot of different ways, but there's plenty of proof, even if you're skeptical about it. How many of you have at least taken care of an infant at some point? You guys? Yes? They're cute, right? God makes them cute so we don't kill them, is what I often say. Are they well behaved? No. No. Jennifer goes, no. No, they're not. And did you teach your kids to be misbehaved? No, at least not to your knowledge at this point. They just know how, right? It's like it's in there. To be selfish, to be nasty, to slap and hit. You get your head in there and, you better watch your eyes. So it's part of them. And then if you want to go beyond that, there's the personal experience aspect of it. Bible talks about this, but I don't need the Bible to talk about it. I got myself. I want to do what's good. I know how to treat people well. And yet, somehow, there are moments when I still don't do it. Even though I take no pride in it, here's a confession of a pastor before you. You don't always want to be in my passenger seat. Okay? I have controlled it in most situations, but my least controlled moments are behind the wheel of a car when I'm behind somebody who's doing something that is provoking my patience, and I just think it's poor driving, which is not the words that I use, by the way. Is that you in front of me, Carol? I apologize for everything I said about you. But, it's like part of you can just barely manage to control. And the more blood sugar low and the more tired you are, the less you can handle it. I would love to be somebody so in control of myself that driving through the streets of Evansville and somebody is just sitting there at the light and it's a short light or something like that, that I go, oh, well, they're probably very tired, poor folk. But I don't. I make some reference to their intelligence, and it's not nice. So there's personal experience that we're sinful. And then there's a sad proof of human history, right? I mean, I guess I shouldn't read these books, but I've been reading about North Korea. I've been reading about post-World War II. And what people do to people is not good. And can I explain it? I can't, other than we're not the way we're supposed to be. That's us. Then you come back to God. A lot of times people want to make God think like a human being. But God makes it very clear that he does not think like a human being. He says, my ways are not your ways. So one of the ways that God does not think like you is that he is absolutely unwilling to just say about his own laws, which I would think would be powerful enough to say, forget it. He is absolutely unwilling to do that. He is just not willing to brush it off, says the Bible. So instead, he does something else that seems maybe to people to be wrong or insane or whatever. God hates sin and punishes sinners, and his model for that is not the one that most people have. This is the one that most people have. You can tell me whether it's the one you have. That we're like on a balance. And if we're slightly more toward good than bad, we'll get by with God. That's in a lot of world religions. It's in some branches of Christianity. It's in what I would just call folk sensibility about God. But that's not the model that the Bible explains. I would call the model the Bible explains more the Ebola model, the disease that ravaged Africa. It doesn't matter if you're a little sick or super sick, you're sick. And the sick get quarantined. That's it. And here it doesn't matter if you're just a little sinful but really a generally nice person, or, Adolf Hitler, Kim Jong-un sort. You're excluded from God and from eternity unless something is done to remediate the problem that we have. And that's the great thing about God. He could have walked off and said, forget the human species, let's just nuke them and start over. But God apparently has some sort of affection for us, and we should be very glad for that. One of the most well-known passage in the Bible, even Bill Clinton knows this one. John 3:16. He was asked, what's your favorite passage in the Bible? One time he goes, John, only one he knew was John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Another one that I think is much more beautiful, in fact, is carved on a bench out there, Romans 5:8. God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So that passage makes a connection between Jesus' death and God's love for us and the fact that we need something to take care of our sin. I think God not only loves us, he has a certain amount of pity on us. We are sort of trapped between him and his enemy. Whether you believe in Satan or not, you can talk about it, but and we are not alone in this universe, nor are we independent of either of these two forces. They have influence over us, and God in particular has say. But God did not abandon our cause. That's why you got Jesus. So look at it this way. Adam and Eve did something wrong that changed them. That change has been passed down generation through generation genetically by reproduction. So what God's going to do is make a change with one person and make the good pass down generation to generation or pass down some way, but it's not going to be genetically because Jesus didn't have any kids, right? So there's a way to connect back to Jesus and what he did that's going to affect us. Now, what did he do? God had to have a single, sinless human being. Just one. That would be good enough. But where are you going to find one? When the problem is something you're born with and you got at the moment you're a fertilized egg. So what they have to do is essentially create one. And that's why Jesus got a funky matter of birth. To be born of a virgin wasn't just some sort of negative comment about sex. It was so that he wouldn't be born with a sinful human nature. So here he is then growing up, not a sinful human being, but he still has to keep God's law, and he does so for 30-some plus years, I would say 35 years. That completes one half of the equation. The other half is he's got to take on the whole weight of what God's law demands be the punishment for the sins of human beings. And the Bible lays it out. The wages of sin is death, meaning physical death, and essentially what a spiritual death would be, which is to be forsaken by God, to have God just utterly turn his back on you. And that's what happens to Jesus on the cross. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen any of Jesus' movies where Jesus is crucified. They vary in graphicness. Stuff like the Jesus movie is pretty tame. Then Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ is definitely the R version, and apparently they're remaking that for some. I don't think they're toning it down. I think they're ramping certain parts up. But anyway, when you look at that particular movie, which I think is probably pretty historically accurate, you just see the brutality brought out against Jesus, and you'd say, why would God do that? And I don't think he did. I think he only had this requirement, that Jesus be forsaken for just a little bit, which he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that Jesus would physically die after keeping that. That's all God wanted. The rest of it, the mocking, the horrible way to die, the crucifixion, the whipping that surely preceded it, that was all Satan trying to get him to quit. Jesus didn't quit. He came to do that very thing. And what it accomplished, in my opinion, is he created a legal way to complete the law that circumvented Satan and allows God to take anybody he connects to Jesus and say, you're forgiven. You're sinless. The law's kept for you. The law doesn't demand your eternal forsakenness. And that, I think, is a huge deal. It means that there is eternal life, and that's why Jesus said, it has to be through me, because that's the way that God made us right with him. And I also say this, I know there's a lot of other ideas about eternal life, but if there was another easier route, I'm sure Jesus would never have to do the hard route. And if you haven't read his story, that's the hard route. For myself, this is an event that happened way in the past. I didn't get to see it, so I don't have that kind of tangible evidence like seeing it myself. However, I think God gives you faith and stuff like that, and for me, it has become such a strong faith that I don't really fear death at all. In fact, for a Christian, I hardly mourn it. And sometimes I worry that people are going to look at me and think, man, you don't care. You didn't care about that person. You don't seem upset about their loss at all. And I just have to say, you know what? I'm just so certain that what comes next is positive when you're connected to Jesus, that if you get out of here, I'm happy for you, not grieved. And so it is made for me a way to deal with a whole lot of things in life, knowing that the end of the story ends with Jesus Christ. And that's my point of view on the topic, why did he die? All right. Time for dinner. Ding, ding, ding. Who goes first? No? Okay, I figured you would, so I said that.
The people I work with think they cannot be forgiven and that they're so awful that no way.
There is no number of sins nor severity of sin that God can't forgive through this process. That's the other great part about it. And that sometimes makes people feel it's unjust, right? Because you could get a pretty nice person who rejects Jesus, but they would still have sin. And you could get a pretty horrible person who would believe Jesus and be saved. And sometimes people can have a problem with that. There's a few discussion questions in here. One that I didn't put in here but thought of later, maybe you want to deal with it, is what do you think about human beings by nature? By nature you think we're good, or by nature you think we're bad, or whatever other options there would be? So you might want to think about discussing that. Okay. I think if you sit at table number 1, you should go eat first.